Good morning, everyone. We are a minute away from starting. Bear with us for just a moment, and we'll get the webinar rolling. We might as well go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. My name is Garrett Griffin, and you have joined us this morning for another fantastic Empired informational webinar. Today we're going to be talking about governance and the practices of governance within the SharePoint context. With me today we have Andrew Jolly, a principal consultant and information management specialist with Empired, and all-around good guy. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Garrett. Good morning, everyone else out there. Yeah.
So today's agenda, like some of our other webinars, is pretty straightforward. A few housekeepings. We'll go ahead and be recording the webinar today, and it will be made available through our website and marketing department thereafter. As always, with the GoToWebinar experience, you are able to lodge questions in the questions panel of the interface, and we will get to those as we can throughout the webinar. Feel free to park those questions there or any other feedback that you have. We expect to run somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 minutes today. We'll see how we go with that. And if there's anything that you need as we go, please do park those bits of feedback within the window. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand over. I'll conduct some intro here, but we're going to be handing over this discussion very, very poignantly to Andrew, who's had, what would you say, Andrew? How many decades of experience dealing with information management and SharePoint?
It's probably just hitting on one, but hey, it was a big one. Yeah.
Is that enough for scar tissue? Yeah.
Yeah, plenty of that. Yeah.
First, a little bit about us. Empired is, at this point, one of the larger or largest Microsoft-centric service providers in Australia. That might actually be the Asia-Pacific region at this point. Andrew and I both come from a company called OBS, who was acquired last year by the Empired Group as part of a series of acquisitions, eSavvy and Sydney, Conducive on the applications development side, and Intergen, who had a presence globally and were based out of New Zealand. At this point, we're about 850 people strong across the organization, operating in a number of different service areas. If you go ahead and click through to the next slide. Generally speaking, we have three core areas of our business. The traditional Empired services sit around the infrastructure and managed services space. We have an applications and consulting division, and Andrew and I work within the business and productivity solutions space, which is where the Microsoft business solutions take place. We have a rather large SharePoint and Dynamics CRM or Dynamics period capability at this point, and a number of shared services that support us. And clicking through, yes, as we've said, we deliver solutions based on Microsoft ecosystem of technologies, and we specialize in integrating these into your business with a focus on user experience and business value and outcomes. And the next few slides will convey to you that we're very busy people. We have won quite a number of awards across the various brands over the years, and work with pretty much everybody who's who in the zoo within Australia. And yep, you can find out more about that on our newly improved website at empired.com.au. So today's agenda, Andrew's going to take us, first of all, through some background theory. What is governance, and how do we differentiate the planning for governance versus putting governance into practice and gaining some value from it? We're going to move on into some of the specific techniques and ideas that we've used over the years to actually govern effectively our environments. We're going to talk about some specific approaches, and I think Andrew's got a surprise demo of a sample control interface available for us to look at. And then we'll talk about some next steps. I just want to add as well that while we are talking very much about the SharePoint environment today, many of the concepts that we're going to discuss could equally apply to other systems. So just keep that
Sure.
keep that in the top of your mind there.
Yeah,
Andrew,
that's a very good
would you
point.
like to lead us away?
Yeah, definitely. So the first point here is about I thought we'd get into is about just making sure we understand the difference between plan and versus practice. A lot of people, and it's probably a lot of people on the webinar out there have probably seen other governance presentations, have done their governance reading. Today's going to be less about talking about a plan and what should be in your plan and what you need to be doing. We just want to focus more on the practice side of it. And really, if we were to ask a question today, it's not so much, we're not asking the question is whether or not do you have a governance plan and have you put one together. The question we're kind of sort of talking about today is, are you executing on that governance plan? Because I think it's one of the parts of managing SharePoint in general that's sort of lost a little bit once a project has ended or once a governance plan has been written. As an example here, we can look at governance in these three very broad concepts. Often we have our plan in place, we have our resources. Now that might be money, that might be people, that might be our team, and it's this action that we need. We need the action to happen to turn that stuff into value. Okay. This is a great phrase that I found in a knowledge management piece of theory, and I thought it rang very true when we talk about the governance plan idea. I think everyone's heard the old adage that a governance plan is on paper and it gets put in a shelf and never gets looked at again. I think that's often repeated in a lot of conferences and so on. And I think this is really the bit of theory that sums it up, and that's without action and performance, the issue of information is quite meaningless. And that's kind of a sad thing. If you've spent a long time toiling with your governance plan and you've got everybody on board and involved a lot of people often in the construction of a plan, for it then not to actually take flight or be implemented is heartbreaking sometimes.
Let's also call out there that the cascading implications of not having effective information governance can cost money. They affect morale. They affect the effectiveness of your information platform, your intranet, your document management solutions, and ultimately are going to cost you greater inefficiency. And that can be measured in key dollars.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about governance today, it's important to think about it in multiple different aspects of governance. We have obviously the platform idea of governing the platform, SharePoint as a set of infrastructure and so on, and databases and all that sort of stuff. And I generally think organizations do that okay. You know, they've got backups in place, maybe they check them every now and again. They usually have a decent sort of idea about what they're trying to do and where they need to go, and that's good. You know, you're looking after the core infrastructure there. It's that those layers on top, the bit that the IT department doesn't really want to know about, all those things inside the SharePoint information environment that you're using as business users, or that are actually delivering the value. And sometimes they can't know about those things. There's too much for them to know about. So, you know, if we talk about today, when we talk about governance today, we need to keep in mind that we've got technology to govern, we've got information to govern, we've even got, you know, applications within SharePoint to govern, we have usage to govern, we have, you know, content itself. So it's a very broad spectrum very broad topic. Moving on from meaningless, what is actually required to govern? What is required to govern effectively? And of course, there are a set of conditions that I think that point to governing effectively. Yes, you do need a plan, an up-to-date one, and make sure it's current, and that it's understood by people. I think that's a really important point, and that they know where to find it, that they know what to do with it, know how to read it, generally know what it means. Actions, and this is what we'll get into a little bit soon in terms of the importance of having a set of tasks and activities that occur regularly, and this is what we're going to hinge on here today. And time, a commitment of time afforded to carry out those activities. It's often difficult to start bringing these activities into any governance activity into roles and people's jobs descriptions where they've never had to do these things before. So time can be an important construct, and it needs to be considered. Resources, have you got the right people to do the things you need to do, or certainly the right access to them? And access to funds. This stuff does cost money, so whether that's time, and that's probably the biggest costs, but there's also tools. People out there might buy tools to help them in their governing efforts, and there'll be license costs for those sorts of things that they might need to have year on year. So there's resources need to be considered. Expertise, so yes, it's like resources, but it's sometimes you may not have the expertise in-house to do the job, so you might need to call on people like ourselves to come in, or it might be that you're using, you need expertise from somewhere in your division where you don't necessarily have full control of those people's talents and resources. So getting the ability to access that expertise in response to the outcomes that you come across when you're governing is important. You might identify a problem or some work that needs to be done, but if you haven't got the people to do it, that can be a little bit disconcerting.
Just on the topic of planning, Andrew, how deep should customers be thinking about going in terms of the development of the plan? Are we talking about desired outcomes and principles, or developing the plan down to the level of work instruction?
It's tempting to go down to the level of work instruction because it feels like you're getting somewhere and that you've got it all under control. The efforts are big though, and often they don't have payoff because you don't really have the capacity to manage those things. Sometimes you're doing activities that don't need to be done because you're not big users of a specific capability set, or statistics isn't a big, or metrics aren't a big part of what you're doing, and the maturity hasn't got there yet. So there's no real need to start getting into that level of governance if you're not going to get any value out of it. So our recommendation is to start quite high level and start by at least defining the things that you want out of the platform, the things that it needs to be doing, so the purpose, the objectives, and then actions associated with making sure that you can achieve those actions and objectives. Beyond that, things will start to emerge, other activities will emerge as to what you need to be governing. So I think you can start, very modestly, and then with a commitment to growing these things out over time.
Excellent.
You don't want to be doing more than you should, I think, in any case. Sponsorship is another big one, so executive support for your governance activities. I don't think this is hard to find. I just think it's often, it's just a case of maintaining that sponsorship. I think you'll always have an executive nodding, wanting to get the most out of their multi-$100,000 implementation or whatever it cost. But it's just about keeping that support in an ongoing fashion. Because just to borrow from that meaningless statement before, without sponsorship, you could almost say that the issue of a governance framework is quite meaningless. You can have the best plan in the world, the best set of actions to do, the best set of resources, but if you haven't really got that push from, or that backing from above or behind you, it's very hard to help the business let you do your job and get in there and change things and move things around or decommission things or get them to behave differently. So thoughts on that actually around in terms of what you need to govern. If you do have thinking of putting together a governance board, a committee, a team, a community, a collection of people, and or if you already do have those people, a couple of considerations. Know the difference between a committee and a collective of volunteers. There is differences there. A committee usually imposes some sort of formal expectation on people, whereas a collective of volunteers is often more likely this is what we see when we see governance teams. We see people doing this almost sort of they're put forward to be part of a governance team or to be complicit in that team, but it's not really a hard part of their role, and that's important because a couple of things can happen if we don't recognize our structure accordingly, and that is we might get well, first of all, generally, governance isn't anyone's only job. I think that's going to be a small part of what they do, and hopefully they're going to be doing it with you regularly. It's generally not written into their key role description or anything like that. And the last 2 points here, competing priorities can mean missing their obligations. So if they have if you're asking these people to be in charge of making sure that the IM policies are adhered to in, I don't know, the project area of your implementation, if they're not able to do that regularly, they'll miss those obligations, and therefore, your efforts can be a little bit,
It sounds to me like we're talking about empowerment here. How do we turn the traditional assignment of governance duties into something that makes people feel empowered?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's different for every organization. Some people will write this into roles, or certainly take a very a strong standpoint of it within an organization. Others might not, and so or they're not in a position to do that. So finding the kind of not the carrot, I shouldn't say that, finding the impetus to get the people to sort of make it part of their regular activities if they are part of a governance team is really a bit of a challenge. But there are, depending on your organisation, there are different ways to probably do that. And the frequency of involvement from these people might vary as well. It might vary from month to month. End of year, we all know what the end of financial year is like. It gets busy, and it may be that they can't do some of the tasks you want them to do, just because it's competing with their other challenges. So those are just some considerations, I think. They're not warnings. They're just sort of watch out. These kinds of things do happen and affect a governance team and commitment from people. So that kind of leads to a kind of a governance objective that I think does sometimes get a little bit sort of overlooked or maybe not considered, and that's an objective of a governance framework or team or community should be to establish and sustain conditions that promote action. If we put this at the center of our efforts, what we then do is we start to become more immune to changes or fluctuations in the people that are doing our work with us. So if we start off with a great big team structure and it's all going well, and then 6 months down the line they've all disappeared and no one's got time to contribute, if we're instead focusing on establishing and sustaining conditions that promote action, we're probably more able to adapt, maybe put other people into those governance roles quicker, or just flex and move a little bit as the organisation moves as well.
There's been an interesting question interjected before we move off the topic of resourcing. Who should head or chair this type of committee?
Yeah, good point. A lot of organizations don't necessarily have an information management person who heads up a divisional sort of responsibility. I think I often think not just one person should do it, and I think a lot of the time we do see people heading these things up coming from a communications, maybe internal comms kind of thing, because the project started out that way. Maybe it was an intranet project and it started up, and the governance team is then suddenly led by effectively a comms angle, and that's okay. It's definitely a valid sort of position to be leading the charge, but we can't forget that there's a deeper need to make sure information management is represented as a whole right across the organization. So my answer isn't to say who's the right role across the business to plug in there. My question would be, who in your organization is taking the lead or carries the can for the information management across the organization? That could be your CEO, it could be your CFO, it could be a person who's not necessarily in that position, but they are right across everything. And it's those kinds of people that you want sort of leading that charge. I often think it's actually multiple people need to be represented. I think you need technical representation and business representation. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment when we talk
Are
about
we potentially talking
carve-up.
too about identifying, particularly in a cooperative mode of developing this community or this committee, of identifying those stakeholders who have the most to gain for the information that you're managing being clean,
Yeah,
tidy, accessible?
that's right. Yeah, the most to gain. It may even be people in the financial side of things or the legal side of things. So, yeah, I think those are the questions that you can ask. You know, what's information management? Who has the most interest in it, or whose roles does it most affect, and who can represent the business from that point of view? And that's how you can effectively certainly get the sponsorship side of things sorted out as well. I think we need to then consider the rest of the business in this as well, and then these are sort of other team members, and this is about bringing the governance out into the business and making them complicit in the decisions you make and the activities that you do to manage and maintain. So onto that approach, establishing and sustaining governance and practice. So I just wanted to say, first of all, one of the main things I do see in the past has been people trying to govern SharePoint as one thing. Okay, so they'll write their policies, procedures, and thing about just this one box called SharePoint, or the name of their intranet, or the name of the information system that they've named the EDRMS or something like that. The problem with that is kind of right there in Microsoft's sort of language, the very first page of their governance advice. Now, this has been the same advice for 7 or 8, 9 years now. Different types of sites require different governance policies. And this is because different sites have different requirements and which reflect their importance to the organization. So what you see here is that different sites. Now, sites, it's a bit of an ambiguous term. I don't mean subsites and things like that. They mean sort of different areas within your information environment require different levels of importance. For example, the project management area where we all do our projects in our organization is very controlled, and we have a very firm structure on how we create these areas, and it's all very automated the way we do that. But on the other side, we have another area within our information environment, which is a community's practice, and that's just a bit of a free-for-all. It's like carnival in there in some areas, and that's okay because they want people to have the freedom. They want people to have the ability to do the things they need to do. Different levels of governance needed in different areas. The same also goes for the technical layer as well. Search is a technical, what we often call a technical service. It's not seen by the business necessarily, but it's a piece of technology, it's a service that operates in that technical realm that has to be governed in a certain way, making sure it's delivering the value it needs to deliver. And even talking about technical services, we can consider sort of the user profile side of things as a technical service on its own, and that has different governance as well. Who can update the values in it? Who shouldn't be allowed to touch it? Can we code against it? That kind of thing. So there's different governance for different aspects of your information environment. A nice way to visualize that
as well, Andrew. I've seen recent examples where the managed metadata service was used to great effect across a farm and a number of different sites and areas, but it was done with a kind of set and forget attitude. And 6 months after that, the decay, if you will, that had crept into the managed metadata structures simply because the organization was changing was quite substantial, and its impact was quite negative.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of where if we don't tend to these areas and these aspects of a platform, they can go off the wayside, and especially if the people that had the knowledge about that particular area or that technical service or business service, which we call the business-facing sides of SharePoint, if the knowledge disappears, and let's face it, people move and change out of companies all the time, it can be very difficult to find out why something was put in place in the first place, or why did it develop a certain way, how should it be used, why isn't it being used in the way it was intended, and a lot of that knowledge can disappear. So it's important to garden these areas like crops, basically. And this diagram here depicts a different way of looking at SharePoint. Instead of looking at it as a tree structure and a hierarchy, it's helpful to look at it as a bit of a landscape. And these main chunks are possible things that you would consider to govern, okay? And we call these business information services. Obviously, underneath this is the platform layer. It's a bit like going under the street. That looks a bit like streets and buildings, doesn't it? But going down underneath the ground, and we're seeing all the plumbing and the sewage networks, the electricity networks, that also needs that governance as well, and that's that technical service governance that we can consider. So there's sort of two sides to this. It's multifaceted. Each one of these chunks, though, needs that sort of representation. The governance team in general can't govern the whole lot. You might have a governance team who largely cannot represent a specific aspect of the PMO or something like that, project management office, and the way they use it. That doesn't mean they've got to be a member of the governance team and all of a sudden you've got 55 people on your governance team. What it's saying is that you've got a governance team that recognizes that there are people out there, mayors of little towns, that want a say in how they can utilize their area, and also how they can develop it further, or how they can collapse it or make it simpler. The governance team is there to help those people operate within constraints and guidelines effectively.
Just on that, if we find ourselves dealing with traditional non-business services topologies and information architectures, is that a significant hindrance towards the kinds of governance we're suggesting here?
No, I don't think so. I think when we talk about this idea of carving things up into areas, we're not necessarily linking that directly to information architecture. It's not oh, this site collection has these sub-sites, so this must be a service. That's not necessarily the case. We can actually group things theoretically together and call them a service as well. So that's an important concept. For example, you might have you might deliver workflow to people, automated business processes using, say, I don't know, Nintex and K2 or any other workflow tools out there. You might allow that as a technical service that can be offered to the business, and it might be being used in multiple places in the portal. However, you could still conceive all those things together as a business workflow service that you could write policies, procedures, and guidelines around, but it's being used right across the board. A little bit like how in a city or in society we might have health service as our thing that is governed by the government and by regional bodies, but the health services aren't all offered in one location in the city. They're peppered right throughout society, but they are managed as a whole. They're directed as a whole by policy and legislation. So it's a little bit like that. So it's not necessarily, this is not necessarily tied directly to your information architecture. Information architecture, managed paths, site collections, and so on, it could quite conceivably map to this, and that could be very handy, but it doesn't mean that you can't apply this idea of carving things up into services and to manage things.
Excellent.
Does that help explain that?
That's excellent.
Yeah, cool. So when we, just to point out, just to reiterate about that idea of people, in the past the efforts have been to create a plan and policies, procedures, guidelines, and this has historically been the way when people have treated SharePoint as one big box and trying to manage it with one set of policies that encapsulate everything as one big blob. What we really want to be doing, if this was some sort of document matrix, we'd have a plan, we'd have policies, procedures related to those. They would be global policies, procedures, guidelines. So policies such as use with the platform has to be in accordance with our IT policy, IT security policy, or privacy, or that sort of thing. What we do want to then bring in is this idea of service definitions for the different areas. And if you think back to that diagram we just had before, we want to write descriptions and for each of these different areas. And there's normally not that many. I could probably say, no, there might be 4 there. Okay, it might look a lot more than that, but let's say we've conceptualized those into 4 things. We'd want to make sure we've articulated what those things are. For example, a corporate publishing environment, the traditional intranet. We might have client partner extranet might be our other one, and then of course project sites that we work with, and maybe there's team sites as well in some shape or form. And we want policies and procedures that talk about working in those areas differently, because site provisioning, for example, the procedure for that in a client action example can be very different to, can I get a new site created in the corporate intranet? Probably not. It's very controlled. And so the procedures can be different when working in these different areas. The next part of what we're talking about, and this comes back to the action idea. Very, very early on, we talked about having actions and tasks, and this is where we want to kind of move into the second part of the presentation, and that's, you've got all these policies, procedures, and guidelines in place. Now, these might be in a document, okay, and that's fine, but we will show you how to get out of a document and online with this stuff, because if it's in a document, as we said earlier on, it doesn't get used, it doesn't get referred to, and it's very tedious to get to work through a big document. Controls are the things that we do to make sure that the policies we've put in place, the procedures we've put in place, the services that we've defined for ourselves, they make sure that those things are working properly, that they are being revisited regularly, that they're being assessed, and so on. And so what is a control kind of made up of? A description, of course, about, okay, what is this control? What do you mean by control? You know, what am I supposed to do? An action, the steps that are required to undertake that activity, or control as we call it. Any resources that you might need, and I'll show an example of one of those soon. And who's it assigned to? Very important. Who's doing these things? And this is where you can be assigning different tasks, different controls to different people across your organization to carry out on a regular basis. There might be individuals, there might be roles, all depends on your organization. And the frequency, how often should this control take place? Okay, so are we doing a review that takes place every 30 days? Are we doing something that's every 6 months? And there's a reason why we like to specify that, because we're going to show you how you can use workflow to, once this control has been carried out, is to use workflow to automatically set it up to occur in a predetermined time in the future. Okay. So examples of controls. So on the technical services side, infrastructure side, application side, we often see these things being done quite regularly. People check the backups. They check search to see if it's performing okay. Most people look at the SQL databases periodically. Patches and service packs. A good idea is to have a control in place that might say every 3 months we need to be reviewing the upcoming patches, or the ones that have just come out, and assessing when we can put them on our development environment and so on. Technical skills assessment. This isn't necessarily a technical thing to be doing, but it's still a control, and that is to say, periodically look at the makeup of your team, maybe your infrastructure team, your IT team. Do we have the skills that we need to continue to support this environment effectively? So the kind of like, think about these things as just like big reminders to do things, and we want to do them regularly. On the business services side of things, the bit in the middle of SharePoint where everything's happening, controls are things like reviewing the IAM policy adherence to make sure people are actually using the right, exhibiting the right behavior in terms of document classification, categorization, use of the content types you may have asked them to use. Site decommissioning is another type of control. Periodically, you may need to go in there and, well, you should be going in and decommissioning old sites that aren't being used. That could be deleting them, that could be sending them off for records management if you've got records management side of things happening. Communications as well, communications on updates and changes. Those things are also valid controls. Organizations change all the time. New people come in, old people go. And people forget as well. And if we don't tell people about things, about systems that are in place, often they can go unused. I think we've all got stories about people either developing whole new systems or seeking budget to put in another system when one already existed, or even down as low level as a spreadsheet. The old story of a CRM database that no one knew was there, but so they go and create their own list, and it's in spreadsheet and it's being shipped around, or it's in Access. And without people being aware of what's in place and what's happening on an information environment, they don't know, so they don't know what to do with those things, and they don't use them. So communication, very important. Full content review of specific areas. This is often, I find, is a relevant concept for groups. Intranets, typically, the publishing concept is everybody thinks they need the approval, publishing approval on their content, but in practice that can be pretty burdensome, hundreds of page requests coming through when they've had updates and so on, and we just generally find that it's not really that effective for most organizations. What might be an alternative is to have a control which earmarks certain areas of your information environment to have full content reviews periodically. And that might just be tasking someone with that job and then giving them the time to do that, and then reporting back on it and so on. Another example there, periodic review of statistics, looking at your search usages and looking at your traffic and things as a task that I think we all would love to do more often, but it seems to go a little bit, seems to join the back of the queue. So putting a control in for people to go in and gather stats every now and again and do something with those stats is a great example of a control that should be regularly put in place if it's what you want to be doing. Just an example, I probably explained them just then. Information service communication would be described, does a business user know how to use a particular service? I don't know, the client extranet, for example. Do they know how to provision a site? Do they know how it interfaces with CRM? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. If there's any ambiguity to that system, then it will be reflected in the use of that system. You can kind of guarantee that. If they don't know that it's there, they don't know how it works, they'll probably be doing a Dropbox and sharing with a client out there. So this is the idea of making sure that people know what's there. And it might be that the action here could be to email or post something to the intranet, possibly even automatically. You might be just articulating things like the current state, upcoming changes, reminders on information service use, how to get things processed or get requests done. And you might do this control every 3 months for a specific service. You might bundle a bunch of services together. You might communicate about the project service, the contract management portal, and the record center. You might communicate about those together every 3 months. So it's not a one-to-one relationship, and it's going to vary depending on your organization.
Just as a bit of a segue, I know that in the past you and I have talked about the opportunities that might emerge out of the enterprise social space as we see activity streams becoming more and more a part of our intranet and information management experiences, that social enterprise or enterprise social story. Are there opportunities for us to maybe get out of email notification and typical alerts and maybe start to embed this information into the flow of the activity streams within our social environments?
I think it's a really good point, actually, because as soon as we say communicate by email, everyone goes, oh God, more email, and I identify with them. And as an alternative, what might happen here is that when an action's completed or something's been done, there's the possibility of, yes, posting this into potentially, if you're Yammer users or you're using the newsfeed capability in SharePoint, using some workflow tricks and techniques, you could be pushing through a change stream, a stream of changes into a specific area, and that might just help people who want to be kept up to date with what's going on. You can keep them up to date, and they can know what's happening and what's going on. They might see that someone's doing a full content review of the safety portal, and they might think, oh good, I've got to go and I'd like to be involved with that. I've got some things to say about that. So I think that's a really good idea, and it's about using different channels rather than conventional email or posting to intranets or things like that. So yeah, really good ideas. And I think the workflow tools out there now are getting good. Even SharePoint Designer workflows can in 2013 can certainly go off and call web requests and so on. That could make that a reality for you today. Yeah. I just had another couple of examples here about controls. I won't read through them, but another one we talked about was information management compliance, regularly going through parts of your portal, making sure people are actually conforming to the information management policies that you need them to conform to. Another one which we will look at in the little demo I'll take you through is performing a sort of a information service operational assessment. One of the things that I think is very helpful in in trying to address big areas and big parts of portals is to kind of be able to address a number of things at once. The example I'll show you uses something called the call framework, which is the conditions for actionable lessons learned. It's a bit like a survey that you'd go through and do with people and sort of address your area of your intranet that you want to sort of evaluate on sort of 7 or 8 different parameters, right from sort of technical things right through to social or human things, like even participation safety is a concept that I use. Do people feel okay to use the system? Is there something preventing them from using it that's a social reason rather than an actual technical reason? So just designed to sort of elicit problems, come up with potential changes that might need to take place, and they're a great way to I think they're a good tool to use when starting out these kind of governance approaches. In fact, if anything, this would be the one thing I'd recommend is using this kind of survey. And if anyone's interested in finding more out about it, then do get in contact with us, because we can do some discussions about it. But I'll flash it up on the screen shortly. So this brings me to the little example we have put together. Someone challenged me to do it on Office 365, so I had a crack. This is a so what I'm showing you here is the difference between sticking things in a document and hoping that you're governing, which is I think most people can identify with. This is about saying let's get out of the document, or at a very minimum, let's publish the document into a place that we're going to call a governance center. I've actually taken a small suite of governance documentation that we commonly put together for people and help them build, and put them into this example site here. And what I've done here is I'll show you, you've got the sort of the going and seeing a list of all the business services, a list of all the controls we talked about. We'll have a little look at that soon. And of course, the governance framework, very important for your plan and to making sure everybody knows who's in charge and so on. So you've got these kind of main buckets. In this business services list, I'll just click on this, of just listing all the business services, sorry. Below that, I've got all the upcoming activities that are in place or that are scheduled to occur soon. You can see this guy, Adrian, he's one of my colleagues here, OBS staff member for a long time. Sit across from him. He's always my test bunny. He doesn't like it though. But he's got a lot of tasks to do in the next few weeks on this particular portal, for example. So I'm going to jump in here though. I'm going to talk about this project collaboration service as a concept. So most organizations tend to have a project function, whether they call that the project management office, whether it's just a corporate kind of projects area. Normally there's something there that people are running to manage projects. We jump into here, and what I've done is, what we do here is we articulate what that service is. So for anyone who's new to the business, or anyone who's got a problem with the service, or anyone who's saying that something's wrong with it and I want to improve it, this is potentially setting the expectation about what the service does. This is kind of the service overview. We then have further service details. We have its key concepts, a page for those, the composition, what makes this thing up, how is it structured architecturally? Is it a big fat site collection? Is it multiple site collections per project? It could be that. So that's where we articulate that. And then we've got our policies and procedures, which are the relevant ones for this service. Now there are global ones, of course, and we could show them in here as well if we wanted to do any different sort of page layouts. We could even include those as sort of global policies, global procedures. But you can see here, here's a procedure for site closure. Okay, so if we're working in project sites, what's the procedure for site closure? We need to do some records management on it and so on. And we also have procedures for site provisioning, for example. So site closure, sorry, might have a policy. It's probably more akin to a procedure. As you can see there, I've just got it aggregating into the wrong spot. Down the bottom, this is where we're starting to list the controls that are relevant for this service. So we have the two I spoke about earlier, an operational assessment for this collaboration service, and its start date, the date it needs to be being carried out is today, and the due date is next week, so it needs to be completed by then. It's signed to Garrett. Garrett, this is your one.
Sorry, Andrew, I'm not going to have time to do this.
Oh, that's okay. We'll figure something out. We'll assign it to someone else. And here's a description of it, the action required, and the resource. So this is the resource here. And now, not everything has to be a web page. I understand that. Some people want to still keep things in documents, PDFs, there's cultures of that. Here's an example where it's still a Word document, where our resource is an assessment. We have a series of dimensions that we want to review the project management service against. And then we have instructions, and then of course we have our forms and our findings. And by all means, this could be a form that could go online as well, but sometimes it's more flexible to use as a sort of a form that you can just fill out and then take forward to the team and start to figure out from a governance perspective what to do. So this is just one example of a control that we're going to be doing every, 90 days. So the task interval for this task is 90 days. If we were to go in and complete this task, this is where these workflows come in. So when the task is completed, normally what would happen is there's two workflows, and I'll talk about those in a moment. In fact, I might even go there now and just show you that. So we've got a control list, which we're focusing on at the moment, the things that are telling us to do what we need to do. There's two workflows. On the left-hand side here of the screen, there's a control task notification. So there's a workflow that's running probably daily, or a long-running workflow. Depending on your platform, we sometimes structure this a bit differently. But I'm using Nintex on Office 365, so I'm using a long-running workflow that pauses every so often. It's going to check to see if the start date is today on anything in that control list. If it is, it's going to then send a notification. I could assign a flexi task or another task to someone to go and carry that control out. Okay, so in theory, Garrett, you should have received a task this morning to say you've got this job to do. Can you do it in a week?
Yes, indeed.
Yep. And then once Garrett's actually completed that task and he's gone and said, I've done it, I've filled in any necessary details and so on, another workflow runs in the background that just updates the task the next start date for the task and the due date according to some parameters in the workflow. So if we just look at this, I'll pop down here to our status, task status. We'll do completed. Now Garrett could have said, I'm not up for doing this next time around. He could have put in a different person, and that's okay. And if we just pop into our controls, we'll actually, I'll point it out. This is our full list of controls that we're just showing up in the relevant business service areas. So if you just want to look at all the controls, here's where you do it. There's our operational assessment, project collaboration service that we just completed. And the next start date will be the 16th of September. Okay, so that's 90 days from now. And what this will do, obviously, at that date is that workflow will run again, find out who the task should be assigned to, and just email them. So it's a bit like an alarm clock for this stuff. And SharePoint doesn't really do this on its own, so we're able to structure things with workflow. I've used Nintex to do these workflows. That's the example there of the first one, task notification one. You can't really fit a workflow on a screen, so I just thought I'd just show you a little bit of a flash of what, interestingly, that's Office 365 Nintex. And it's coming along nicely. We've heard there's lots of fun things coming out in the next few weeks at the Worldwide Partner Conference they're going to release, so I'm very keen to see the enhancements and stuff they bring through for that product. It doesn't necessarily mean you need Nintex to do this. I've constructed these before for people using SharePoint Designer equivalents of these workflows and using information management policy capabilities that work like a timer. So if you are interested, you don't have to have a frown on your face if you don't have any of the great tools like Nintex or K2. Do contact us if you're interested, because we do have alternatives. Okay. So next steps, the steps to developing governance in practice rather than just in plan. These are things that I hope you can do now yourselves and give you a bit of a guidance on what to do next. Evaluate your SharePoint environment as a sort of collection of services, like we talked about. Can you carve it up like a city full of regions? Name those things. Try and conceptualize that way. That's your first step to starting to govern, not as a big blob, but as individual, interlinked. Okay, not silos. They're still linked information services. For each of those business and technical services that you identify, take a moment to define their purpose. Get it down there as to what is the value of this thing to our organization. It sounds like a really mundane thing to do. Of course, it's a project site. but of course it gives us value. But when you're trying to go for that sponsorship and you're trying to seek more budget to improve something or buy an app for the sites to work better, it's really nice to have this when you're trying to seek money from your CFO to articulate the value of these areas, and that's the stuff they love to see because they want that to make decisions on. Define the policies and procedures for that particular service to ensure that it can continually provide value. I don't mean go and develop multi-page policies and procedures. Just the policies really are the things that have to happen when using a business service, and the procedures are just the things that have got to be done to make those things happen. Okay, so they could be series of bullet points. Okay, they don't have to be big loads and loads of pages of information. So use a judgment there, and then define what controls need to regularly occur to either support the objectives above, the purpose or the policies and procedures. What are the things that you're going to need to do to make sure that keeps going, and how often these need to take place. And then evaluate that governance team that you have to determine if you've got the appropriate people and the resources, the time, and those sorts of things, and tune those teams in that framework. Let the things you're going to govern help you understand who you need to be putting in place to control things. You might be pleasantly surprised. You might actually be able to shrink your teams, but to decentralize some of the control for certain aspects out there into the business. And by all means, update your governance plan and framework. Move from a document to SharePoint. If you're keen to start doing this now, go for it, because what I showed you just before was really just a series of pages within a site. It could have been documents as well. It doesn't have to be all nicely formatted like that. The control list itself was working very much in isolation. So if you wanted to get started first and then come in and put this control list in later and automate that up, that's doable. Okay, so there's nothing really stopping you from starting to make steps in the right direction today yourselves. What can we help you with though? I mean, of course, that's why we do these things, letting you know what we can do for you as well. If you need help auditing and reviewing those environments you have there, if you want help defining the environment in terms of services, the service thing sounds great, Andrew, but I don't get it. That's fine. We can definitely help people with conceptualizing portals that way. It's different for every organization, so we're very happy to help out with those discussions and that sort of work. Formulating policies, procedures, and controls, we can help you formulate those things. We can review them for you. We can comment on those. We can seed some other ideas for you as well, or certainly address ones that aren't working and provide some other ideas. Constructing a governance center, we can definitely help you there. I always encourage people to have a go though. Definitely have a go, and then if you need us to help, then give us a call. But it's not necessarily black magic, but there are some tricks every now and again with workflow if you want to get some automation happening that we're very happy to help with. Workshops, guidance, coaching, if you have regular coachings, if you have regular governance team meetings and you just want to shoot the breeze with us, we've done that before. We've come in regularly to groups and done Q&A questions, talks about where things are heading, where they should be putting efforts, and we've done sorts of things like that. So we have lots to offer in this space if you want to get a little bit more control over your governance of your platform. It's a big topic, so very happy to have a chat about it and understand your needs and inquiries. I've got Michelle Sims' email address down there. She's a client executive in Brisbane branch. However, that doesn't mean you've got to go to Michelle. Everybody in the organization can talk to you if you have any queries, your local branch or your current client executive. Absolutely. If you're one of our existing clients, or hit the website, and there's lots of other ways to contact us there. That's a little bit of an overview there of what we can do.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Suffice it to say, Andrew and I both do a lot of breeze shooting, that's for sure. Happy to share it with you. Empire has representation in a state and or country near you. Michelle Sims would be your contact for any of our Queensland customers. And of course, AJ and myself are Queensland based and happy to be a part of that conversation with you. With that, just like to reiterate that we have taken a recording of today's session. Our marketing department will be happy to make that available on our new and improved empire.com website very shortly, and I'm sure there'll be follow-up communication as well. We have no further questions in the questions bank. other
Great.
than a thank you. And with that, I'd like to extend our own thanks to everybody for staying tuned this morning. And yeah, look, we'll see you out there. Everybody take care. And thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for attending. Have a good day.